of building the Syrian state. That's a political movement calling for establishing a democratic civil state in Syria. In New York, Fawaz Gergis, director of the Middle East Center and professor of international relations at London School of Economics. And here in the studio in Doha, we're joined by Louay Safi, a senior member of the Syrian National Coalition. Welcome to all three of you. But I want to start with Reem Turkmani. Reem, the new Prime Minister has been given the job of building a new Syria, in inverted commas, a new Syria, in the areas the rebels control. What do you think made the new Prime Minister the right man for the job?
First of all, I know nothing about the man. The first time I heard his name was when he was announced as Prime Minister, and every person I met so far said that he never heard anything about him. So I cannot judge his personal qualifications. However, in his first speech, he told us that his top priority is to overthrow the regime, and that he insists in no negotiations or dialogue with the regime whatsoever. Now, to my mind, the job of Prime Minister is not to set up such a political agenda, but actually to do actual work on the ground, to run all the municipal tasks, such as water, electricity, bring order and normal life to the areas he's going to govern. It's not his job to tell us, whether he wants to overthrow the regime and how. And unfortunately, as well, what that tells me is that 2 years after the Syrian street have carried the slogan, "We want to overthrow the regime," the Syrian elites or politicians who are coming forward are still unable even to add one single word to this motto. Instead of presenting political strategies, political program and frameworks, they are still repeating what was said on the street 2 years ago. So why all this blood? Why all this work? Why all these demonstrations? We could have saved time and he could have just gone to the street and said this. So he added zero so far to the Syrian struggle. And also he says he doesn't want to negotiate, but again, this is against the any political solution, which at the end of the day, the solution in Syria will be determined politically. And also, I guarantee you that if he wants to work on the ground inside Syria, in the liberated area, he will be negotiating his way the whole way through, because whoever is in power in these areas, they're not going to submit to him easily. They got their Reem, power by fight.
You're covering a load of issues there. We've moved away from the original question. Fawaz, his election wasn't unanimous, as you know, far from it. Some delegates tried to postpone the election, some walked out before the vote. Is he the right sort of character to be a Prime Minister?
Well, look, Stephen, let me be blunt. Almost a third of the members of the Syrian National Coalition basically opposed the process by which Mr. Ghassan Hito was selected, and also the way that the Muslim Brotherhood, the dominant faction within the Syrian National Council and Syrian National Coalition, that basically brought about this election of Mr. Hito. We know, I'm not saying anything new, Stephen, when I say that the top leader of the Syrian National Coalition, Mr. Ahmed Muaz al-Khatib, was opposed even to nominating a prime minister and interim government, because of the fear that you're going to have now two governments, one in Damascus and one in the diaspora, and this would likely deepen and widen the divisions that already exist. But beyond the man, Mr. Ghassan Hito, who basically was obviously supported by a dominant faction, mainly the Muslim Brotherhood and other elements, I think he faces three major challenges, two of which are very daunting, beyond the personality, Stephen. The first one is, will he be able to unify the political opposition outside Syria, given the cleavages that exist? Almost a third of the Syrian National Coalition opposed his selection. Point one. Point two, a second challenge, which is more daunting than the first, will he be able to find the resources, the money, the tens of millions of dollars that are needed to pay salaries of the people inside Syria, and also provide basic goods and services in the semi-liberated area? Stephen, one point I want to make here is that the struggle has become a resource-driven, that his credibility will depend on his ability to provide consistent consistent goods and services. And finally, the most difficult challenge facing anyone, not Mr. Ghassan Hito, is that the fact, will he be able to unify the armed factions inside Syria, the unruly inside factions, and exercise control? My take on it, and again, I'm not saying anything original, he will face major resistance from the unruly almost 100 armed factions inside Syria unless he builds his credibility by unifying, putting the house, the opposition house in order, and providing the services and the money and the resources.
You've asked so many questions there. I mean, hopefully we will address some of them in Inside Syria. Louis Sefer here in Doha. Mr. Hito hasn't led a government institution, let alone in the midst of a civil war. He hasn't any military experience, even though he is nominally commander-in-chief, I suppose. So why was he elected?
Well, I think he is the best man for the job given the available candidates. Now, let me tell you, I mean, this notion that the Muslim Brotherhood are dominant in the coalition is not correct. They are an important component, but I can tell you they don't, compose more than 10% of the current coalition. So I think it was not their decision. There was a very spirited debate, and really what ultimately boiled down to is that the world is not serious about supporting Syria. We heard a lot of talk, and we would like to depend on the Syrian people inside. Okay. There is a need for a prime minister. There is a need for administration because the country is becoming fragmented.
None of you have answered this question. You've all gone off at tangents, which I'm sure, and other issues. I just wanted to know what made him the right candidate to be interim prime minister.
Well, let me say a few things about him, very briefly.
Many other issues.
Now, he is a community person. He has a long experience being a very active member of the Arab American, Muslim American community in the United States. He has set a fund after 9/11 to defend some of those cases that were brought by the U.S. government to target American citizens from Arab origin, and he was very successful in setting that fund. Now, when the revolution started, he left his job, moved to Turkey, and started helping first by setting another fund, and then by becoming the director of the aid unit within the coalition.
Okay,
and he went inside. He went inside the country.
Right. Okay. Well, let's go back. Let's go back to Reem. Reem, go back to almost the original question. Is it likely that this man can deliver competent governance inside a war zone and provide provide the sort of utilities and facilities that Fawaz was talking about earlier?
Indeed, not anyone can deliver this right now. First of all, what is a prime minister without an institution?
Does he have to make it up as he goes along then?
And how can you make an up an institution? I mean, you can't just cook it overnight, right? And unfortunately, his position is polarizing, and more polarization leads to more confrontation, to more war, and that makes the whole situation more difficult. The most important thing to bring stability to Syria and to these semi-liberated areas is to bring peace to it. And peace that comes through political solutions, not with political confrontations, not with throwing, meaningless slogans, and not with killing any chance for political solutions when he says no negotiations or dialogue whatsoever. So it's really not about him. We know nothing about him, and it's not all about his personality. It's the whole circumstances of this so-called government. My main concern will be also, what are his resources? What are his financial resources? He will have no national resources whatsoever. So I will be very concerned about who is going to pull the strings.
But exactly. Can he, you've talked about what he has to do, can he act as a unifying force here? Can he bring the Islamists and the secularists together in a credible, cohesive opposition?
Mr. Ghassan Hito will rise and fall depending on his ability and capability to unify the multiple ideological and political and personality differences within the opposition outside Syria, and remember, Stephen, inside Syria. You keep asking why was he elected, as somehow we can dismiss politics. Remember, Stephen, whether it's in the United States or in the Syrian coalition, politics, internal politics, local politics determined that Mr. Ghassan Hito was the right man for the right job. Born in Damascus, he's a Kurd, appeals to minorities inside Syria. And I didn't say, it was not my point that the Muslim Brotherhood played a key role in the selection of Mr. Ghassan Hito. Some leading members in the Syrian National Coalition basically said that they were upset because the way that the Muslim Brotherhood and their allies within the Syrian National Coalition basically shoved the process through. I think he might, this is really where he is very competent. His managerial skills, remember, he was a manager in terms of technology and what have you. So he has the managerial skills. The reality is, Stephen, is that most of his resources will come from outside sources, in particular Saudi Arabia,
right,
Qatar, and other places. And my take on it now is that both Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the United States and the West are very determined to provide resources because they realize, everyone realizes, this is a resource-driven struggle, and his credibility will depend on providing the resources. The question is, for how long? Will the outside players continue to provide resources if the struggle continues for a year or two from now on?
As we enter the third year of war, Louis Safi, another question: can he balance the competing demands for power, for authority and position within his own government? Because that too is going to be crucial.
Now the man is given 3 weeks to form a government, to find ministers, and to present them to the coalition. The coalition will continue to be the oversees his work, and the coalition can put a vote of no confidence if he's not able to deliver.
Well, you don't want no confidence at this stage, but the last thing in the world you want is a squabbling opposition.
What I'm saying is that he reports to the coalition, and so he has a mandate to run the liberated area and provide services, because the state has disappeared there, and we started to see small regions and new forces popping up. We would like to make sure that the whole place is united, and I think I mean, Fawaz said it very well. He's a good manager, and he has proved himself in the last 3-4 months in trying to manage a very tough situation, inside Syria.
Okay, Fawaz, he also has to project that image we talked about of credibility to the rest of the world, because the rest of the world is looking at Syria and seeing what they perceive to be a very divided and a very fragmented opposition. So his main job is to tell the world we are one opposition.
Well, Stephen, again, you're asking me, and I want to be blunt, always on Aljazeera English. Yesterday, in his press conference with the King of Jordan, King Abdullah II, President Barack Obama said he stressed the need for the opposition to put its house in order, to be cohesive, to be credible, to fill the vacuum that already exists in many parts of Syria. The West, and I'm being blunt, the Western powers don't care about personalities, about names, whether he was born in Damascus, whether he's a Kurd, a minority, or even basically a manager. The West cares about two things. They want the opposition to coalesce, to become solid, to stop bickering, to fill the vacuum of power that exists in some parts of Syria. And more importantly, the West needs one thing. They want the new man, Ghassan Hito, to basically unify the armed factions inside Syria and begin to fill the vacuum that has been filled by some of the jihadist elements.
So just
like
one figure,
front.
in other words, one figure to coalesce all the different parts. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
So one voice.
They want, in the words of Barack Obama, we want, they said, a cohesive opposition that replaces the militant elements on the ground, like a Nusra front. This is what the West cares about.
Reem Turkmani, Fawaz says the importance of politics here, which I acknowledge, because everything is politics. But the new interim Prime Minister said his main goal is the overthrow of the government. But that's not a political way forward, is it?
It is. I mean, it's very confusing. And for me, politics is now about finding political solution for Syria that incorporate all those players, the people in the liberated areas and the actors there and those in the rest of Syria, and also unifying the international players around that political solution. Fawaz was talking about the unity of the opposition and how the West is stressing the need of that unity. The unity that concerns me the most and that concerns most of the Syrians right now is the unity of Syria. And establishing an exiled government is a concrete step towards dividing Syria. It is extremely frightening and scary even for those living inside the liberated area. I don't agree that the West want a unified opposition because they actually contributed to the polarization and fragmentation of the opposition when they chose to recognize one stream of the opposition as the one and legitimate representative of the opposition, reproducing a new Article 8 for the Syrian opposition. I think the unity will only emerge when there is one viable solution on the table. Right now, the fragmentation is around which solution is going to work. Is it more arming, intervention, politics? Nobody knows. Once the united international community is united on one way forward, one political solution, such as the Geneva Communique, which they agreed on before, you're going to see most of the Syrian opposition and the other Syrian forces. I care for those in the middle as well. And I care also even for the loyalists because they also have to be part of the solution. When there is a unity around the solution, you're going to see the Syrians united.
Louis Safi, in a speech after his election, he immediately urged Syrian soldiers to defect. And he also promised that Syria's refugees could return to the rebel-held areas of the north and the east of the country. But won't he find that promise hard to fulfill, especially if those areas are under continual bombardment or assault?
Allow me, before I address this question, to visit the point about his speech that he will not negotiate with Assad, because I think this has been brought up several times. Now, what he has stressed is the very position of the coalition, that there is going to be no dialogue with Assad and his security people, but we are for negotiations that would lead into a transition into democracy. Now, the Syrians are not going to accept anything less than democracy. The Assad is part of the problem. He is a war criminal and cannot be negotiated with. We tried initially, before he raised the destruction and the death in Syria to the figure that we all know today.
You've covered that ground, which is important. He really has a lot to do. That's the former Syrian agricultural minister Assad Mustafa, who lost to Hito. Fawaz, first of all, I mean, we're short of time now, but first of all, what does he have to do first and foremost?
The first and the most important task facing Mr. Ghassan Hito is to unify his own house. Basically, we know, Stephen, that there are major divisions within the Syrian National Coalition. That is, you have two factions. One would like to pursue a diplomatic settlement. Mr. Ghassan Hito represents the other perspective. No political settlement with the Assad regime, period. This particular is really the election of Ghassan Hito, in a very blunt term, means basically the option of war supersedes the option of diplomacy. Now you're talking about the sound of war basically is above everything else. And the question is not whether, I mean, one can criticize the opposition whether they want to topple the Assad regime. First of all, how long will it take? What will be the costs? Will Syria remain a unified state? What will happen to the social fabric of Syria? So far, it's been 2 years. My take on it, this is a war of attrition. It will take a great deal of time. And unless Mr. Ghassan Hito succeeds in putting his own house in order, I think the credibility of the Syrian National Coalition and the opposition outside Syria would suffer a great deal, much more than it has suffered so far in the eyes of Syrian people, not in the eyes of us, people outside Syria itself.
Exactly, who are watching very carefully. Reem, Turkmani, very briefly, the most important priority for the new interim Prime Minister?
to bring peace and prosperity and stability to the semi-liberated area, to stop the bloodshed there, and build new institutions again. I don't think he should engage himself in any politics right now. Obviously, he's not the right man for it. Why doesn't he leave it for the others? If he delivers and regulate the area and stop the bloodshed, he will have the support of most of the people there.
All right, and Louis Safi, finally, your take, the most important issue he has to confront or he has to achieve closure with in his first few months in the job? Well,
I think the most important thing for him now is to set security in the liberated areas by bringing some sense of order and unifying some of those factions fighting inside, meaning the regime, fighting the regime, and also providing services. You know, there is a huge population in the north that needs services and need government, and I think that would be his mandate. And
especially
I'm sure
as summer comes and the heat
and let me add this: I think many refugees are willing to come back if there are services, even though there are some bombardments.
And that, again, would add credibility to him
absolutely.
And his office. I understand. Thank you all very much indeed. In London, Reem Turkmani; in New York, Fawaz Gorgas; and here in the studio, Louis Safi. And thank you for joining us. Remember, Aljazeera has extensive coverage of what's going on in Syria, not just on this programme, but on our news bulletins and online at aljazeera.com. I'm Stephen Cole. Thanks for joining me. The news is next.